Well, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, made a statement a few hours ago about what to expect on July the 19th.
We will stick to our plan to lift legal restrictions and to lift social distancing. But we expect and recommend that people wear a face covering in crowded and enclosed spaces where you come into contact with those you don't normally meet, such as on public transport.
Joining us now, Professor of Neurology and Director of the Institute of Infection and Global Health at the University of Liverpool, that is Tom Solomon. Tom Solomon, a very good evening to you. Thanks for your time this evening. We know, don't we, that the effectiveness of masks varies hugely according to things like the cotton thread, the way they're worn, the way they're maintained. In the generality, do they work?
They do work. At the start of the pandemic, we didn't think they were important. We thought most transmission was by contact. But it's become clear as the pandemic went on that masks do make a difference and they do have some impact, yes.
How much impact?
Well, that depends a bit on the setting and it depends how well they're being used. In hospital, we use them very carefully and we use them single use effectively. And once we've finished, we put them away and we dispose of them safely, washing our hands afterwards. Of course, we've all seen Joe Public behaving very differently with masks, touching them and then touching door handles and perhaps not being so careful. But the evidence suggests that they do have an impact overall.
What is the test for you as to when we should stop wearing them?
I certainly think at the moment we should still be wearing them in some circumstances. I think we should be wearing them on public transport. I'm rather surprised by the announcement today of the government that they want us to decide individually when we should and shouldn't wear them, because I think public transport is something that people have to use to get to work. And so those who are anxious about getting infected will want others around them to wear the masks. And of course, leaving it up to individuals, it's a bit like us, the government saying, well, everybody knows all about speed limits now. Everybody's got very good at it. So I'll tell you what, we'll get rid of all the speed limits and we'll just leave it up to you to decide.
Tom, with respect, that some people are going to say, oh, well, come on, that's catastrophising. There's a difference between driving recklessly at 80 miles an hour and getting into a virtually empty train carriage and whipping off your mask.
Well, I think if you're talking about 80 miles an hour, then that's the equivalent of somebody entering that train carriage and coughing and spluttering all over you and perhaps declaring, wearing some badge saying, I'm a non-vaxxer, I'm not going to get vaccinated. And so, that's the kind of extreme situation. I agree on a quiet train carriage, then the risks are reduced. But if you're somebody who's very nervous about these things and there's anyone in the carriage with you and you have to be there to get to work, then you would rather other people wear masks. And I think it's just slightly curious that we're not getting clear direction at the moment. I'm not saying forever. Later on in the pandemic, when things are very much under control, then we may be able to say we can stop wearing masks altogether. But at this stage, when we're entering a third wave, it seems an odd time to say we're going to stop the masks. Very different for opening up businesses. There is some economic benefit for opening up businesses, but I can see no economic benefit at all in telling people who are getting on public transport, you don't need to wear a mask if you don't feel like it.
But just in terms of the process, I don't know if you heard what I was saying at the beginning there, but I mean, for instance, you mentioned shops and businesses. If somebody were to go into a supermarket where that supermarket has determined, because they've got terrific ventilation, the doors are open, for instance, that it's OK for people not to wear masks, but the shop union is saying, actually, we'd prefer it for the benefit of our members that you do, we start to get these discrepancies and conflicts. And at that point, if the government's saying we're backing out of this conversation, it's between you, citizens, union members and the bosses of the company, who decides, if not the individual?
Well, I think you'll find in those circumstances, people who are anxious about masks and want to be in environments where everyone is wearing a mask in a shop will choose not to go to that shop and they'll go to another shop where perhaps they are being a bit more rigorous.
And Tom, what about people, you were talking about anxiety and vulnerabilities, what about those people who actually feel tremendously vulnerable and anxious when they come into contact, and again, I don't know if you heard my introduction there, but come into contact with people who are wearing masks and they feel that they're missing out on those vital facial cues that make the world just work a little more, a little better, a little more happily than it would do otherwise, and hitherto it used to.
Again, I think those are important points, and I think if somebody is hard of hearing and they're struggling to hear what somebody's saying, and they get a great benefit from lip reading, I completely understand that. Unfortunately, we've been in a circumstance where those kind of important values and points, so they are overridden by the fact that we've been in a pandemic and there's a virus been spreading that kills people and has killed quite a lot of people. So those people have had to take a back seat up till now. I think there will become a time when people won't be wearing masks, and then anyone who's threatened by somebody in a mask or who can't hear someone lip reading, that they'll be okay. But I just don't think we're quite there yet. And importantly, I think it's odd that it's being left up to each individual to decide.
OK, well, you've made that very clear. Tom Solomon, we appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. Let's turn to the journalist and author, Peter Hitchens, who I think can join us now. Peter Hitchens, very warm welcome to you. I don't know if you heard what Tom Solomon was saying there. He says, unquestionably, masks work and we ought to stick with them while we have to.
I think it's extraordinary that people should continue to assert that they work, since the government itself and the World Health Organization, right up until June last year, were perfectly clear that they made very little difference either in protecting people from infection or from preventing them from passing on infection. There has been only one major randomized controlled trial into the effectiveness of masks, the down mask trial, which went largely unreported by most British media. And what that said was that the difference between those who wore masks and those who did not in actually getting infected was statistically insignificant. So I think people should be a bit less confident about asserting that masks work in themselves. The other simple point here that we have to make is that there is a big difference between the loose cloth masks, which are commonly worn by the public, and the sort of masks which are worn in hospitals, which are the N95 type particularly, which costs an awful lot more, which can only be worn once, which if touched while it's being worn becomes useless, and is entirely different both in nature and use from the things which are being worn. And the other thing is that there doesn't seem to be any serious correlation between mask usage and the levels of infections of COVID around the world if you compare all countries. I think the other thing we must remember is a fascinating scoop by Deborah Cohen, the medical correspondent of BBC Newsnight, a year ago now, when the World Health Organization reversed its position on masks. She inquired and discovered from contacts that the decision had not been taken as a result of medical information, but for political reasons. And she put this to her contacts at WHO, and they did not in any way seek to put her off it. I think there's evidence of this all over the place, the reason why the British government and some others seek to continue mask wearing is that they see it as a badge of compliance, and that they think that if people stop wearing masks, as they have in large parts of the United States now, I believe, if they stop wearing masks, then the whole atmosphere of what I would call fear and panic, which has been created by mask wearing over the past year or so, will dissipate. And once people stop being as afraid as they have been, the entire state of compliance, the willingness of people to do all kinds of things in the belief that if they don't do them, everyone will fall ill, will diminish. Well, you can see why they might think that. You can argue that it might be a sensible policy to take, but I don't think it's particularly factually based. And I think people should be wary of people just asserting that it is so. If anybody ever says to you, "Well, masks work," ask them to cite the proper randomized controlled trials of the gold standard of this kind of study. Ask them to cite the randomized control trial, which actually shows that what they're saying is true.
Well, the professor a moment ago was likening walking into a train carriage without a mask to ignoring the speed limit. I describe that as catastrophizing. How would you describe it?
It's an extraordinary thing to say. We know, and the similar arguments made about seatbelts. Seatbelts have been in experiments made since Volvo started doing them in 1959. Experiments on careful recording of consequences on both sides of the Atlantic for, there's say, more than 60 years have established that seatbelts are extremely effective in saving people from serious injury and death in accidents. And so it's to compare that with the masks, as we've just discussed, where that evidence is, to put it mildly, weaker, is very odd. And then to use this business about high speed, again, experiments again, the Transport and Road Research Laboratory and elsewhere have shown that the higher the speed you travel at, the more danger you put people in. It's demonstrable. It's true. People shouldn't talk like this and make these parallels unless they can produce evidence to show that it's so. And I think a lot of the consequence of this is to make people much more worried than they need to be. And all the time we keep forgetting, I like many people, have been vaccinated twice over the past few months, and this was either completely pointless, and there was no purpose in asking us to do it or spending all that money on developing the vaccine, or it has actually made a difference, which means that the worries that we had back in last autumn and winter simply aren't the same. There isn't the same progress from people testing positive with COVID, and hospital admissions, and indeed of people falling seriously ill and dying. So that was the purpose of the vaccine. And if that was all pointless, if there's no point in doing it, then please let us know. Otherwise, surely the situation is entirely different.
Peter, you said that wearing masks for the government could be a kind of badge. I made my point in the introduction there that there is a sense in which they are becoming, or in danger of becoming, from next Monday, a particular badge of affiliation, almost a bit like Brexit, except worse in some regards, because some people, not everyone, some people will look at someone wearing or not wearing a mask and make a judgment about their ideology. Do you think that's going to happen, or am I scaremongering?
Well, I think it's already happened. There are some people who do not wear masks, and most people in an awful lot of businesses everywhere else are perfectly prepared to accept that they are exempt from doing so. But there are people who get either very worried by this and think that they're threatened, or who get angry about it. And the danger of this sort of, I won't say confrontation, but this sort of friction becoming more common if the rules are made not exactly weaker, but less clear, seems to me to be considerable. Now, of course, it is a badge. There was a rather good piece in the Times by Janice Turner a couple of weeks ago about how she and one of her friends had viewed each other. Her friend thinking her a hopeless sheep, and she thinking that her friend was an irresponsible spreader of disease. People get quite worked up about this. And even people who were formerly friends can fall out over it. It is dangerous, and it's all part of the creation of this atmosphere of fear and of hiding at home and of staying away from work and all these other things which we have done has made an awful lot of people extremely worried. And those of us who think that it's all out of proportion often feel, and I'm, as you probably know, one of those, often feel that we are surrounded by people who've adopted a wholly different religion from us. And I try to respect them because it's clearly a sincere belief, but it is quite difficult if they begin to put pressure on me to follow their belief when I don't. And I think the danger of that sort of thing might actually be greater now. A clear indication, look, if the government believes that the vaccine program has been successful, a clear indication that it actually believes it's been successful, we say, right, that's the end of these masks. So they say, this has happened in large parts of the United States, and I don't hear any evidence that it's led to any huge increase in people falling ill or dying.
Peter Hitchens, have to leave it there. Appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.